Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to talk. So my name's Chris Parkin. I work for Cambridgeshire County Council. I'm going to be covering domestic energy efficiency upgrades and available funding that there is for those upgrades. It'll be focused around some guidance that the Council's published, and there is a link at the end to the Action on Energy website where you can find all of that guidance if you want to look at it in more detail. So the first 5 or so slides are going to cover domestic energy efficiency upgrades. 6th slide, I'm going to talk about a government study and the findings of a government study on installation of heat pumps at large scale in domestic properties, how they performed and what the costs were. Then I'll talk about some grant funding that's available for domestic upgrades on low-income homes, how to find a trusted contractor for domestic installation, which can be tricky sometimes. And if I've got time, I'll talk very briefly about some of the larger scale council energy projects we've got and the council's policy on community energy and where we're hoping to go forward next on that, because that's very much a new area of activity for the council. So this is our energy efficiency guidance booklet. There's a direct link to it there, but it's also on the Action on Energy website. So it just gives guidance on how you can save money on your domestic energy bills, what grants are available to help you, how to find reputable installers, and how to understand your carbon footprint. It starts off talking about some of the quick wins, a lot of which are kind of behaviour change type actions. So turning down the heat. If you've not already tried doing so, which you probably may well have done, then there are decent savings to be had by turning down your thermostat settings. And it's best to try it incrementally. Turn it down a degree, wait a couple of days, see if you're comfortable. If you're still comfortable at that temperature, try it a degree lower until you get to a point where it's just a little bit too cold and you need to go back up a degree. Draft proofing. Surprisingly large amount of heat loss through drafts in homes, up to around 12%, mostly around doors and windows. Typically, draft proofing is something you can do yourself as a DIY task. You do need to be a little bit careful. You can't completely eliminate movement of air in and out of your home because you do need that air movement to avoid condensation and mold growth, but that's best done kind of actively with either a ventilation system or by opening and closing windows for a short while each day to get rid of the damp air. LED lighting, much more efficient than fluorescent and filament bulbs, readily available in supermarkets and DIY stores. Occasionally you can have issues with dimmer switches, so you may, if you've got dimmer switches, do check that the bulbs you're buying are suitable for a dimmer switch. Insulation, loft insulation is kind of the first one to think about. You can lose up to a quarter of your heating energy through an uninsulated loft. Most homes do have some insulation, but it's not at all unusual to only have about 100 millimetres, and the current recommended standard is 270 millimetres. Again, in many cases, it's something you can do as a DIY task to top up your own loft insulation. And another quick win in terms of carbon savings is to look at switching to a renewable energy tariff or a renewable energy supplier. So a large number of suppliers do offer renewable energy tariffs. They're probably not all equal in terms of exactly how renewable they are, so you may want to do a little bit of research on that. But there's lots of reputable businesses like Octopus Energy and Good Energy who are offering very well backed up renewable energy tariffs. So if you've done all of those things already and you want to go a bit further in retrofitting your house, how would you go about it? First thing to do is if you've got an energy performance certificate, and you can look up on the government website to see if there is one for your property, have a look at that because it will have recommendations for further measures. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's produced using a standard assessment procedure, and if you want something a bit more detailed and a bit more in-depth, there is a an industry standard called PAS 2035 that is specifically aimed at looking at whole house retrofit. So it will cover insulation, both in loft, walls, floors as well, although that's often quite disruptive to do floor insulation, glazing upgrades. It has a strong focus on ensuring that there's enough ventilation maintained so you don't get damp problems, which there have been problems in the past with houses being retrofitted with extra insulation and that causing damp. It'll also look at things like heating controls to better control your heating system, solar PV, and low carbon heating options like heat pumps. And it will provide you a holistic plan and a lot of information in terms of what will things cost, what will be the impact on your energy bills, but also on your carbon footprint. I've spoken this morning with a few people who are interested in thermal imaging. So a good idea is to borrow a thermal imaging camera, have a look at your building and identify where the worst areas are for heat leakage. Some of the district councils offer loan of thermal imaging cameras. Cambridge Carbon Footprint, who are here today, they have a loan scheme as well. You have to book onto a training session to be trained in how to use the camera. Next one, I think, is 29th of February. And then after that, you can book to borrow a camera. I think they're in quite high demand, so if you're interested, get your booking in early. Wall insulation. So around a third of heat loss is through walls. If you've got cavity walls built between the 30s and the 80s, they are probably uninsulated. Contractors can blow in cavity wall insulation. You do need a certain amount of care in doing that to ensure you don't block any ventilation that exists to keep the floor joists dry and free from condensation and rot. But if you find a reputable contractor, they will be experienced in doing that. Solid walls are harder and much more expensive to deal with. Nevertheless, you can insulate internally, either by attaching insulation boards to the wall or building a stud wall that you then insulate inside the property. Some loss of space, quite a bit of disruption in doing it. Or you can externally insulate your wall, again with insulation boards that are then rendered. Both of those are very effective. External insulation does tend to be more expensive. Then looking at renewable energy generation in the home, solar PV, very popular. How valuable that is to you will depend a little bit on when you're using electricity. If you're in the home during the day and using electricity when your solar's generating, great. That's going to save you a lot of money. If you're out all day and it's exporting all the energy to the grid because you're not using it, you can get a small bit of revenue from something called a smart export guarantee that your energy supplier will be obliged to offer you. But it's not very much compared to the value of, compared to the cost of buying electricity. So it's best to specify them if you can use it all yourself, essentially. You can bridge that mismatch. If you don't consume electricity during the day, you can implement a battery storage system to store the electricity so you can use it in the evening. That is a very good system. They've been becoming much more affordable. They were originally quite expensive, but they are increasingly affordable and of interest. Historically, the council over the last few years has run a collective purchasing scheme for solar panels on domestic properties called Solar Together. So that looks to try and generate some economies of scale in purchasing solar equipment and pass those benefits on to residents. At the moment, we're just waiting for a committee meeting in March to consider whether to run that scheme again this year or later on. So keep an eye out for announcements on the County Council's website or on your district council's websites about when that next scheme will run. It runs as a kind of an auction scheme, so there is a sort of fixed deadline for an opportunity to express an interest, and then it sort of repeats again the following year typically. Heat pumps, an area of great interest to me. The government's heat and building strategy made it clear that greenhouse gas emissions from domestic heating are actually a very significant source of UK emissions. I don't think it was a new piece of knowledge in that strategy, but that's the most recent one where it's been mentioned. They're about 17% of total UK emissions, and it's impossible to get to net zero unless we virtually completely decarbonise heating in our homes. Heat pumps are the main opportunity to do so. There's both air and ground source heat pumps, and they are suitable for the majority of homes. I'll come on in the next slide to the findings of this government study that's really informed that statement. And typically they're capable of delivering really, really large carbon savings, so up to a 70% carbon saving relative to a gas boiler, slightly more compared to oil. And the good news at the moment is that the government are offering a £7,500 grant towards the cost of installing them. That was £5,000 up until sort of October time last year and has been increased. So it's quite a good opportunity if you're, excuse me, if you're looking at replacing your heating system in the near future. It's quite a good opportunity to capture that funding and do that kind of upgrade. There are some stipulations to it, but not too many. So you must have an EPC, and there can't be any outstanding cavity wall or loft insulation recommendations on there. But those are relatively straightforward measures to do and probably sensible because they are going to save you money on your heating bill. There are a lot of negative stories about heat pumps. It is very important that you get a proper assessment of the heat losses of your building and that radiators are sized accordingly. I think a lot of the negative stories have been older installations where they've not been very well thought through before the installation went ahead. This is the study I mentioned. Government-funded study installed heat pumps in 742 properties with 3 different contractors doing the installations. And those properties covered the full range of age and type. So there were properties with very low efficiency ratings, G rated on EPCs, and lots of properties with solid walls included, as well as more modern properties with cavity walls. Some of the key findings: average installation costs in total were just under £15,000. That's before any grant funding. That included, in most cases, replacing radiators with larger radiators. They found that that was necessary in 93% of the installs. So if you are having this done and your contractor tells you you don't need new radiators, you might just want to challenge that to give yourself comfort that you're in the 7%. Interestingly, they didn't need to upgrade insulation in many cases at all. Even in the solid wall properties, the majority of them were installed without any insulation upgrades. Relatively small proportion of properties deemed unsuitable, but that was unsuitable doesn't mean it was impossible to install a heat pump. It just meant that for this study they didn't have access to large enough heat pumps, or possibly that they felt it wasn't going to be affordable within the remit of this particular project. There were a few cases, though, where they felt there would be a challenge achieving thermal comfort, but it is very much the minority. Solid wall properties, I mentioned, a bit more challenging, but they still deemed nearly 70% of them suitable for retrofit. And interestingly, this study looked at the operational performance after they were installed, and they found that they were achieving, on average, a seasonal performance factor of 2.8. So that means 2.8 units of heat provided for every unit of electricity consumed. And oddly, that there was no statistically significant difference across the age range of properties. So even the older properties with solid walls, they performed around that level. So Home Upgrade Grant 2, this is the funding that Cambridgeshire councils have secured for domestic energy efficiency upgrades on low-income homes. eligibility criteria are there. It's only oil-fired homes, unfortunately. If you're interested, visit the Action on Energy website and you can express an interest. Do let other people who you think might be eligible know about it. Finding a trusted contractor. This can be a bit bewildering, but there's a huge number of supportive certification schemes. So government has its Trustmark scheme. You probably want to try and find a Trustmark registered installer. If you're looking at a whole house retrofit, that should be done to the PAS 2035 standard. If you're looking for solar PV or air source heat pump installation, you need a contractor who's MCS certified, really. There is an alternative scheme, FlexiOrb, that is not as well established, but I believe it's very similar, but I'm not quite so knowledgeable on that. And Action on Energy, that's the council's brand, so not just county council, but the districts. And we have procured 5 contractors with all the relevant accreditations, and they are available under the terms of our framework for people to commission, to call off work on their own homes. And again, details on our website. I'm not going to talk about this because I haven't really got time, but the council has a large programme of large energy projects, solar farms, solar generation on park and ride sites. We've done a large heat network project that's just starting operation, and we've done a lot of low carbon heating on our own schools and council buildings, and that's all been air source heat pumps, and we haven't had any problems with achieving thermal comfort in those buildings. We are looking to get more involved in community energy. Community energy very much about communities taking the lead, so it's not something we'll be dictating to people how they go about it, but we're interested to know how we can support communities. The council did in March last year adopt some principles about community energy projects or developing projects to benefit communities from the transition to low carbon energy. And we're probably going to be doing a consultation in the summer to work out what practically we can do to provide more support on those types of projects. That's it from me. A link to the Action on Energy website, the QR code will take you there as well. There's detailed guidance there covering the material I've gone through, and City Council have got some guidance there with quite a lot of detail on what kind of upgrades would you do on different archetypal properties, so properties of different ages and different types. Okay, thank you very much.